February 28, 2026, 2 a.m. In the darkness above the western Iran, American and Israeli aircraft crossed the border. Operation Epic Fury has begun. Within hours, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is dead. Iran's nuclear sites are burning. And in Washington, the White House believes the mission is over. It is not over. 4 days later, on March 4th, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps broadcasts a single message on VHF radio to every vessel in the Persian Gulf. The message is 7 words long. No ship is allowed to pass. Over 150 tankers drop anchor immediately. Maersk, the world's largest shipping company, suspends all transits. CMA, CGM, MSC, and Hapag-Lloyd follow within hours. War risk insurance in the Strait is cancelled entirely by March 5th. In a single week, 20% of the world's daily oil supply simply stops moving. The International Energy Agency calls it the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Bigger than the 1973 Arab embargo. Bigger than the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Bigger than the Gulf War. And here is the question nobody in Washington had answered. What happens when you go to war in the most important body of water on earth and your enemy closes it? To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back, not years, but decades. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage of water between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. At its narrowest point, it is just 29 nautical miles wide. The navigable shipping channel, inbound and outbound, are each just 2 miles across. 2 miles. That is the gap between your daily life and a global economic collapse. In 2025, an average of 20 million barrels of crude oil transited that passage every single day. That is 25% of all seaborne oil on Earth. Alongside it, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, most of it from Qatar, and up to 30% of globally traded fertilizer, which means food prices for billions of people. Iran has understood this leverage for decades. In 1988, the US and Iran fought the so-called tanker war here. In 2012 and again in 2019, Iran threatened closure to pressure Western sanctions. Each time, the world flinched. Each time, the Strait stayed open. This time, the Joint Chiefs of Staff explicitly warned President Trump before the February strikes. Attack Iran, and Iran will close the Strait. Trump, according to verified reporting, dismissed the risk. He believed Iran would capitulate. This was not an accident of miscalculation. It was a decision made with full information and a different conclusion. On March 2nd, an IRGC official stated publicly the strait is closed. 2 days later, the closure was formalized and attacks began. Anti-ship missile, naval mines laid in the shipping lanes, fast attack craft swarming tankers. By March 8th, the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre had confirmed 10 ship attacks. 5 seafarers were dead. By March 12th, the oil production of Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates had collectively fallen by at least 10 million barrels per day. Brent crude surged past $120 per barrel. California gasoline exceeded $5 per gallon in the second week of March. The World Bank projected a 24% energy price surge for 2026, the sharpest rise since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. By April, more than 1,550 commercial vessels were stranded. 22,500 mariners were trapped. Traffic through the strait had fallen to approximately 5% of its pre-war average. Trump responded. On March 12, he announced the U.S. Navy would begin escorting tankers through the strait. On March 15, he called on NATO allies, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Australia, to send warships to help secure the passage. Every single ally refused. Germany's defense minister said plainly, "This is not our war." The US launched a unilateral aerial campaign on March 19, deploying 10 Thunderbolt jets and Apache gunships to destroy Iranian naval assets. On April 13, the US imposed a full naval blockade on Iran. The IEA's emergency architecture, built after the 1973 oil shock, released 400 million barrels from strategic reserves. It covered roughly 20 days of lost Hormuz flow. The 1973 embargo had removed 4.5 million barrels per day from the market. The Hormuz closure removed 20 million. The emergency systems designed to handle the old crisis could not absorb the new one. Layer 1, Iran controls the strait's geography and used it. That much is visible. Layer 2, the systemic force. This crisis was not born on February 28. Failed nuclear negotiations in Geneva, a prior 12-day air conflict between Iran, the US, and Israel in June June 2025, and war risk insurance premiums that had already doubled in the weeks before the strike. The market knew this was coming. Someone was positioned for it. Layer 3, the hidden beneficiaries. According to a verified New York Times analysis comparing oil export values from February 28 through May 8 of 2026 against the same period a year earlier, two countries recorded the largest revenue gains. The United States saw approximately $50 billion in increased export revenue. Russia saw more than $15 billion in additional revenue with no change in export volumes, simply because prices rose. Iran also increased revenues, maintaining access to the strait it had closed to everyone else, while continuing to sell oil to China and India at a premium. The countries that lost money were Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, US-aligned Gulf states with no alternative export route around the blockade they did not ask for. China and Russia vetoed a UN Security Council resolution on April 7th that would have reopened the strait. The timing was not a coincidence. The MOU ending the war was signed by Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian at the Palace of Versailles on June 17, 2026, following the G7 summit. The strait is technically reopening, but the economic damage is not reversible on any short timeline. The World Bank forecasts average Brent crude at $86 per barrel for 2026, up sharply from $69 in 2025. Qatar's LNG infrastructure suffered damage at Ras Laffan, with two of its 14 production trains offline. The IEA projects that lost Qatari LNG output could reduce global supply by as much as 120 billion cubic meters between 2026 and 2030. The 2-mile channel is reopening. The consequences of closing it are not going away for years. History offers a warning here. After 1973, the world spent a decade building strategic reserves, diversifying supply, and funding new oil fields specifically to prevent a repeat. That system was tested in 2026 and found insufficient against a larger shock. The question policymakers have never fully answered is what happens if the strait closes again for longer with no ceasefire on offer. Here is what the story really means. A 29 nautical mile passage of water between two coastlines runs a hidden tax on every liter of petrol you buy, every flight you take, and every item in your supermarket. That tax goes up every time the strait is threatened and goes through the roof when it closes. The visible actors are the United States, Israel, and Iran. The systemic force is 50 years of Western dependence on Gulf energy, never fully broken. And the hidden beneficiaries, according to documented trade data, were the two countries that did not fire a single shot, the United States and Russia, both of which sold more oil at higher prices to a world that had no alternative. The poorest people on earth, who spend the highest share of their income on food and fuel, paid the highest price for geopolitical decision made in Washington. That is documented, that is verified, and that is the part of this story that deserved far more attention than it received. So here is the question for you. If the world's leaders already knew that closing the Strait of Hormuz was a possibility, and some knew it was a probability, should the attack on Iran have happened at all? Let us know in the comments what you think, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.